She grew up on Lopez Island, has been working as a professional botanist in the islands for over 20 years. Her research focuses on plant-human interactions, including invasive plants, Coast Salish agriculture and heritage, and locally adapted tree fruits. She also volunteers with Kwiaht's Indian Island Marine Health Observatory. And with the Orcas Island Historical Museums host an annual apple tastings and scion exchanges. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, Madrona.
I'm going to take you through something of a whirlwind tour of the heritage apples in the islands. But I want to start you quite a ways back. So this is your road map of where we're going to go. We're going to start with the history of apples in the islands and why they are so diverse here. So I'm starting there. I don't know if you recognize this, but this is why apples do so well in the San Juans. This is Malus fusca, and this is a Malus fusca orchard, essentially, a wild one. Malus fusca is also known as Pacific crabapple, but more importantly, it is known as ka'ohu ilch. So ka'ohu is the crabapple, ka'ohu ilch is the crabapple tree. And the reason that we know this name is because this is a fruit that's been important to people in the islands all the way back. Because people show up in the San Juans just about the same time as the glaciers retreat. So as soon as there are islands, there are people here. There are Coast Salish people here. And this is one of the fruits that they took advantage of and enjoyed. So crab apples and apples grow incredibly well in the islands. I'm going to advance this one.
Right here.
Coast Salish people arrived not long after the glaciers, and they lived throughout the islands. This is a map of Coast Salish named sites in the islands, including reef net sites and village sites, and kind of centered around East Sound here, because this map was made to show you the world around East Sound, around the village of Chalwesing. And you can see there are people and people doing things everywhere throughout the islands at the time that we have names from. So this, sometimes people think of the islands as kind of a wild or a natural landscape. And in fact, the islands are a garden. They're a place that people have been looking after for thousands of years. How does that get us to apples and orchards beyond the ka'ohu? Well, let me introduce you to Mary Kwiaht. And this is a map of Deer Harbor of Kaiu Lagoon from the 1890s. And what you see there, where you see those little dots, let's see if I can show you up here. Dots here, and then some more down here. Those are orchards that were mapped by the Coast and Geodetic Survey when they did their coast mapping of the islands. And because the islands are all coastline, they mapped pretty much everything here. And this is the homestead of Louis Kwiaht and Mary Kwiaht. Mary Kwiaht is from the Mitchell Bay village on San Juan Island. And this is the easy transition for mixed families, Coast Salish and immigrant families, moving from eating and cultivating ka'ohu ahu, native crab apples, to planting orchards. And this orchard's still there. In fact, I picked you some apples from that orchard this morning.
No.
So people went crazy from there with apples. Apples grow well here. They're an excellent way of proving up land. For Coast Salish families who'd married, or for Coast Salish matriarchs with typically white husbands, one of the ways of reclaiming land was to plant an orchard on it. But everyone planted orchards. This is the town of Freddie Harbor from the same set of maps. This is the King Orchard. And you'll know if you've walked around Freddie Harbor anytime recently, this is not what it looks like anymore. But it was acres and acres of apples and pears and cherries and plums. And this is a kind of broad map of where those orchards were in the 1890s and early 1900s. This is the parcels the modern day parcels that had orchards on them in those tea sheets. You can see it's all over. This is an aerial photo from 1932 of what is now Camp Kwiaht. This is the Seattle Fruit Company, which planted extensive orchards in that area. Now these orchards, the orchards that you see here, are no longer there. The remnants of this orchard, though, is right at Camp Kwiaht itself. So even though the bulk of the apples in the islands were planted in 1900 and 1910, people were still planting orchards up until at least the 30s, and still planting orchards now. So the orchard acreage decreased, but new orchards continue to be planted. And that's important to think of because new varieties of apples, fruit trees in general, but apples is what we're focusing on, were developed and introduced during that time. So most of the varieties we're finding in old orchards are developed, you know, all the way back to the 15 somethings and through into the early 1900s. But people kept planting, and as you know, I'm sure many of you have planted apple trees. So the diversity keeps going up even as the acreage goes down. Okay, I want to take you through a hopefully not too whirlwind tour of that diversity, and first explain a little bit about how we know what we know about these varieties. So I worked with agricultural historian Boyd Pratt. Boyd went through all of the newspapers and general notices he could find from the 1880s to about 1915 for the islands, and pulled out every single reference to fruit growing that he could for me. And then I went through those papers and I pulled out every time an individual variety was mentioned. So I made myself a list of varieties I expected to find in old orchards. And then we started looking. And we spent a lot of years looking and learned a couple things. One is there's a lot of orchards in the island still, which is wonderful. Two is apples are really hard to identify just from looking at them because there are so many kinds. So in the last few years, we enlisted the help of colleagues at first at UC Davis and then at Washington State University, who used genetics to identify the different varieties. And that has blown my mind. So we started off with a list of about 60 varieties, and we haven't found them all, but we've located quite a few of them. And we've identified a whole bunch of varieties we didn't expect to find. And at the end of the whirlwind tour of diversity, I will also tell you about why the diversity continues to increase, even if you're not planting new varieties of trees. So there are over 7,500 named varieties of apple in the English language. That's not counting the apple cultivars grown in other parts of the world. Apples come from Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Western China. The diversity there is huge, and people have named varieties there as well. You might notice there's a pear that's snuck in that photo, so they're not quite that diverse. This is the first variety you should know if you're looking at apples in the islands. This is King, sometimes better known as King of Tompkins County. It comes from New Jersey. A lot of our apples come from the East Coast, particularly New England. And the funny thing about this is probably the most popular heritage apple in the San Juans, and not very well known in New Jersey where it comes from. But it grows really well here. It's big, it's beautiful, it's delicious, you can do a lot with it. If you're not familiar with King, you should hopefully become so. It's not quite ripe yet though, so if you haven't had a King yet this year, you still have time. This is one that you can often find for sale because it is a variety that people still know and love and recognize. One thing about King, it is a triploid. You're going to hear this a lot. Triploid means it has an extra set of chromosomes. A lot of our large apples do. Extra set of chromosomes means they can make an extra set of protein products so they can grow bigger, produce bigger apples. But when it comes time to make pollen, the chromosomes don't line up right to produce viable pollen. So they're not pollinizers for other varieties. So if you have triploids in your orchard, you need to have some diversity to make sure that everybody gets pollinated. Baldwin. This apple I did not know when I started looking at apples, and I should have, because it turns out to be probably as popular, if not more popular, than king in old island orchards. The reason for this is a little bit sad. It's a nice variety, but the reason it was so popular is it ships incredibly well. People were planting apples to ship them down to Seattle and sometimes further. Occasionally, apples from the islands would go to California. Occasionally, they go to the East Coast. Baldwin is one of those apples that will make it there, and it will look just as lovely and be just as hard as it was when you picked it. It can be a little boring straight off the tree, but it keeps really well. And at tastings, people often like it because it has a crispy texture, more like modern apple varieties. Also a triploid. Sometimes people get confused by the greenings in the islands because everyone just calls them greenings. These are our superlative cooking apple, but they are in fact the Rhode Island greening. There is a variety called Northwest greening, but it refers to the old Northwest. It's from Ohio. The greenings in the islands are Rhode Island greenings, not Northwestern greenings. They're a wonderful variety. They're heavy, they're green, they're a little bit lumpy. You can eat them fresh. If you like Granny Smith, you might like them. They're not as crispy, but they've got that same kind of lovely green apple tartness. But where they really shine is in baking. They're dense, they make the most incredible apple cake, they make wonderful apple butter, and my father will not make sweet cider without them. So they also make, if you got fallen greenings, which this year might happen because everything is set so well, cut them up, stick them in a slow cooker, and they make the best apple butter on earth. They're also a triploid. This is the season. We think of this as kind of early apple season right now, but this is actually the beginning of the mid-season. We're into fall apples already, and Gravenstein is the apple of right now. They're ripe right now. Some of them are overripe, some of them are just ripening, depending on your elevation, the amount of sun. But this is another wonderful triploid variety that grows throughout the islands. They're early, they don't keep, but they're perfect right now. Multi-purpose, they bake well, they're so good fresh. They're a good cider variety. And yeah, they just don't keep. So eat your Gravensteins right now. There is a unique variety of Gravenstein that comes from Olga. So it's not genetically distinct enough to be considered necessarily a whole different variety because it's not a seedling of Gravenstein. It's a somatic mutation. It's a sport. One branch of a yellow Gravenstein in Olga produced red fruit. And it was commercialized. In fact, it made the papers and spread throughout. I recently had a sample of the San Juan tested, and it came back as Washington red. Now, Washington red in this case is Olga red Gravenstein. So they're probably grown all over the place, but definitely abundant here on Orcas. And this is a painting of Olga red Gravenstein from not long after it was discovered. Not all big apples are triploids. This is 20 ounce. 20 ounce is just about getting ripe now. It's kind of easy to identify a 20 ounce if you open it, because it has kind of an odd looking central star with blunt tips. This is a big apple, sometimes mistaken for a king because they're similarly large and striped. 20 ounce though, instead of being long and waxy, is round, softer textured, tartar, doesn't keep, makes incredible sauce. Also known as 20 ounce pippin. Pippin is a term that means it grew from a seed. So it's most apples are pippins, although the Olga red Gravenstein is not. It's sport. So you can call it 20 ounce pippin, but know that that pippin bit just explains how that apple was discovered. This is also from the East Coast. Esopus Spitzenberg, this one to me reminds me quite a bit of a king in terms of flavor, but a much better keeper. Beautiful and long, a favorite apple of Thomas Jefferson, planted at Monticello. Quite popular in the islands, partially because it was promoted as a commercial variety, but also productive and lovely. Smaller, this isn't those huge kings and Gravensteins, but probably an underplanted, underappreciated now. Not a variety that people are as familiar with, but I recommend it. It's good cider apple too. Blue pearmain. This picture does not do it justice. It glows. It's It's a bright, deep red, overwashed with a bloom, so kind of like a white cast that makes it look purple. It is the prettiest apple I have ever seen, and very, very tasty. Nice and dense, has the distinction of having been included in a little essay about wild apples by Thoreau. Wonderful apple, still grows in the islands. There's an old one by the cemetery on Lopez, if you ever want to see it sort of in the wild. But easy to get cuttings of, highly recommended. Keeps well, bakes well, and who wouldn't want an apple that looks like a painting? Every russet that I have sent into the lab for testing, with the exception of some recent samples I collected on San Juan, has come back golden russet. These were the popular russet of the islands. They're still popular as a variety. This is one of the few heritage varieties in the islands that is still extensively planted in modern days because it makes good hard cider. But it is also a fantastic eating apple. One of those apples you want to slice rather than chomp into, because it's kind of a dry, dense texture, but a beautiful nutty flavor. Keeps well, late. You can also use it for cooking. Just a really, really lovely. If you like Cox's Orange Pippin or any of the other russets, you will love golden russet. And we know it grows really, really well here because it's in the orchard at Marin. It's in the old brown orchard on Lopez that was planted back before 1889. I think I just found one out at the orchard at Indralaya. It grows beautifully in the islands, produces very well, gives you a gorgeous late harvest, a very, very sweet fruit. And the juice doesn't oxidize, it stays golden. So golden fruit, golden juice. More gold, this is the other russet, although technically a rhinette. So russet refers to that leather-like texture on the outside of the apples. Rhinettes are lightly russeted. This was known in the islands as Canada rhinette, but it's a French variety, and they know it as Rhinette Blanche du Canada. So in this case, it's the white rhinette as opposed to the gray rhinette. And we just found some in an old orchard that was planted by as far as we know, by a Métis farmer from French Canada. So this one I expect to find on Orcas as well. So far we haven't, but we'll keep our eye out for it. And it grows well here. So if you like your russets, you might consider Canada rhinette as well. We have a couple more kind of rhinette-ish golden apples. So Grimes Golden, which is, as far as I know, still considered to be the parent of Golden Delicious, but it's a denser, sweeter apple than that. Not Golden Delicious sometimes can be a little bit, it's refreshing, like drinking water is, rather than like biting into a good apple sometimes. And then Belmont, which I've got some for tasting from the Kwiaht orchard, is another of those that's kind of golden with a little russet on the outside. Very nice, sweet apples, very pretty. This one I also have. This is the one I picked from the old Kwiaht orchard, from Mary Kwiaht's orchard. It's I have a little bit of a question about the name. So in 1891, SRS Gray wrote a piece for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer about the apple varieties that, well, fruit varieties in general, but apples in particular, that grew on Orcas, that he was growing and promoting. And in it, it included a note that people were growing fall pippin on Orcas, and they were erroneously referring to it as golden ball. So this apple variety in the picture there was identified by the lab as golden ball. So I thought, okay, that's probably, people here were right, and SRS Gray was wrong about the name. But it turns out golden ball is what people call this variety in Maine. And it doesn't match up with any of the varieties in the USDA collection anyway. So I pulled up the paintings for the pomological watercolor collection, and I think there's a solid argument that in fact, this is fall pippin, and people were erroneously calling it golden ball, including in Maine. So we'll find out. I'm going to talk to the lab and see what they think about that. It's a wonderful variety. It's ripe. almost ripe now, getting riper. It's a seedling of Dropt de Bretagne, which some people probably, there was news recently from Maine that they discovered a living Dropt de Bretagne tree on an island in Maine. And it was probably the oldest variety grown there and one of the oldest trees. It's the parent of many varieties. It's a Norman apple variety. It's also the parent of 20 ounce. So this is a sibling of 20 ounce. I've only found one tree of it. It'd be fun to see if we find more. We have another mystery for you. I sent in genetic samples from a bunch of trees on Orcas because we had funding from the Orcas Island Community Foundation to do this. And a number of them came back listed as Goldridge, and then it said A, which stands for apple, LOR, and a number. And I thought, okay, so my samples are all labeled AKWI for apple, Kwiaht. So A, LOR must be the lost, LOP must be the lost apple, LAP? Lost Apple Project, A, LAP, excuse me. So I contacted the lab and said, what is this variety? You've got it as Goldridge. I have no idea what it is. And then you have a number which suggests that they're finding it. They tell you it's Goldridge, but you don't have in your collection. And that's true. Goldridge is a variety that was promoted, developed, or discovered and sold by Luther Burbank in 1912. And the Lost Apple Project found this apple in California and in southern Washington, and morphologically, it matches the variety described as Goldridge. But the orchards it's showing up in on Orcas were planted in the 1890s. It can't be Goldridge. So I looked through the list that Boyd and I came up with, and we proposed that in fact it's a variety called Monmouth. So I asked the lab, do you have Monmouth in your collection? They do not, but here is a painting of Monmouth. Here's an apple from Camper Kyla. Here's an apple from Rand State Park. Here's a photograph of the Lost Apple Project's Goldridge. And I think it's a plausible argument that in fact this variety is actually Monmouth, which we know was planted in the islands in the 1890s. So the lab got a sample of Monmouth from the Temperate Orchard Society, and it doesn't match. But the lab says, look, the Temperate Orchard Society has these collections that people gave it, and they don't always match what we have in our collection either. So theirs might be Monmouth, and yours isn't. Yours might be Monmouth, and theirs isn't. So I've been contacting historical societies in New Jersey to try and find a sample of Monmouth that we know is Monmouth and see if we can sort this one out. In the meantime, it's a wonderful apple. It's extensively planted in old orchards and Orcas, so it grows well here. And I'm hoping to have cuttings available at our next scion exchange. It's not ripe yet, so I don't have it for you to taste. We also have nearly forgotten this wonderful apple. This is a late apple, but it's hard to forget if you live on Orcas, because if you go to the farmer's market, there are apples growing in the East Sound Village Green. All but one of those apples is Wagner. Wagner is a late ripening striped apple, keeps well, gets better in storage. It's also the parent of a number of interesting hybrids that we're finding in the islands. And at the Lopez apple tasting, it was the highest scoring apple of all the samples we tried. At the Orcas tasting, it wasn't, but it might not have been as ripe. So if you need a new keeping variety, consider the Wagner. It's wonderful. Another keeper, yellow bellflower. This one we found at probably the oldest orchard on San Juan Island, which is at Westcott Bay, now on property owned by the National Park. Beautiful, long conical kind of an interesting core when you open them up. They taste kind of like Gravensteins, but they ripen late and they keep well. So if you like Gravenstein, consider the yellow bellflower. Here's a mystery. This is a painting of an apple from James Tulloch's orchard that was painted at the same time as a lot of the paintings I've been showing you, and it was listed as Imperial Pippin. And I have looked through all the books and catalogs of apples I can find, and no one knows anything about Imperial Pippin. Fortunately, once again, I think it's SRS Gray that came to my rescue. Imperial is a synonym for the variety Ortley, which was grown here and which looks like bellflower, which is why this slide follows that one. And Pippin, I think I introduced to you, just means seedling. So hopefully, eventually we will find the Imperial Pippin here on Orcas, in the East Sound area, which is a seedling of Ortley, or he just was confused and he called his Imperials Imperial Pippin because it made them sound better. But it's a beautiful apple. And perhaps one day we will relocate it. I've got one of these for you. This is a Gloria Mundi. It is a cooking apple. We're not going to serve it because you wouldn't enjoy it. This is a normal size for Gloria Mundi. And then the follow water, you can see they're, I've got some, but I didn't bring any today. You can see that they're not quite as big, but they're similar, enormous apples. These are both enormous cooking apples, very productive, grow well in our climate. Most people aren't going to grow these because most people don't grow just cooking apples. But if you want huge production, and at least with the follow water, decent keeping qualities, here's a couple of considerations. Follow water grows on both Lopez and Orcas. At least we found it there. Gloria Mundi so far, I've just found on Orcas, but let me know if you see enormous green apples growing in orchards. I would love to track down more of them. Hugely productive. These were picked yesterday, and the trees, this is just a little small example of what the trees were producing. These are a couple of varieties that we didn't expect to find because I've never heard of either of them. These are both from San Juan Island. There's two whole orchards, or the remnants of orchards. In one case, 3 trees. In the other case, I think 6. Came back, and actually, glowing coal, also we found an orchard over here on Orcas by Westtown. So a very unusual variety. I had to ask around to find anyone who'd ever tried one. Except for it turns out the glowing coal grows at Spring Street School, so probably a good portion of the kids on the island have eaten that at one time or another. So if you know a Spring Street student, you should ask them what they think of the glowing coal and see if they know what you're talking about. I asked my lab tech, who was a Spring Street student, and she said that they're very, very juicy. And the juice runs down your arms and they're quite good. So I'll try and get some for the tasting at the museum. This is in the back for tasting. This is Sydney Caulfield's favorite apple. And when we had the genetics done, we had it identified as a variety called Westfield Seek No Further. Since that time, I've had genetics come back on other trees as Westfield Seek No Further that don't quite resemble this. So I think there was a mix up in the samples. And I'm going to go back to calling this Sydney's favorite. And I'll send in a sample and see if we can figure out what it is, because it is truly exquisite. It's an early russet. It has that same kind of high nutty flavor, but ripens much earlier. That is a painting of Westfield Seek No Further. You can see they resemble each other, but they might not quite be the same. Hopefully we can get some cuttings from that. It's an old tree, not in the best of shape, but it'd be lovely to have more of it growing. And then you could bribe Sydney with some of her favorite apples. So I told you that the diversity is increasing even if you're not planting new apples. And that's because over 100 years of orchard history means that seedling crosses occur. This is East Sound rose. It normally doesn't have that beautiful rose color. It's not named for its color. It's named for the fact that it smells and tastes like rose water. This is a cross of Wagner, which is late, and Yellow Transparent, which is early. I don't know how it happened, but it's a wonderful tree. It's in the East Sound Village Green behind the new little playground. And we've been grafting from it. I have some for you to taste. The texture's not great. The flavor's really interesting. It's an early apple. It doesn't keep very well, but it's probably one that we should propagate. These are a couple crosses of the same thing. So they're Northern Spy and Smith Cider. And they're quite different from each other. Cormorant Red is a little, like almost crabapple sized, kind of mushy, very sweet. Caillou Peach, I went to see if I could get you some, but it's not quite ripe, is orange and large and sweet and crispy and fantastic, and we should grow it all over. Everyone's favorite crabapple, or at least my favorite crabapple. Oddly enough, a triploid crabapple. This is transcendent. I have some for you to taste. It's orange inside. I think something like 5 of the crabapple samples I sent into the lab came back transcendent. You figure I would have learned to recognize it. Now I do. It's produced a full-size tree. But it's not, most of the time people plant crabapples to pollinate. It's a triploid. So plant it because it's delicious and beautiful. It's not going to provide the pollination that you want. We also have wild hybrids of the Malus fusca with domestic apples. These are really exciting. Here's some of the things they've crossed with, but I've sent in a bunch more samples. They're often more climate resilient, salt tolerant, and they have a lot of citric acid. So in cider making, malic acid converts to, through malolactic fermentation, changes its flavor. Citric acid retains that tartness. So they have sort of a unique potential role in local cider making. Okay, having run you through my whirlwind tour of just some of the varieties, I'm going to see if I can tell you a few things that will help you in your orchard explorations here on Orcas. So when you select varieties, if you're planting new varieties, there you have considerations. You want to know what season you want your apples in, how you like to use your apples. Are they going to pollinate? We saw a lot of triploids, and think about apples as habitat too. Summer. So most people think of our apples as starting with like Gravensteins, which is actually fall apples. Summer apples are like red astracans, lodies. There's a whole bunch of early apples that nobody grows anymore because you can buy apples from New Zealand. But consider, you could have fresh fruit starting in July from your own orchard. So early apples are definitely a thing. Sometimes they're not the textures we've come to expect, but most of the time they're useful for something and quite delicious. Fall apples, like Gravensteins, sort of the early season right now. Your fall apples are ripening. And then you have sort of the fall into winter and the late apples, like Kings are early in that season. And then you have things like Wagner's and blue pearmains and bellflowers and Baldwins, and all of those will keep you through. Oh, and the russets will keep you through. So thinking about making sure you have a full season in your orchard. What do you like? How do you like to have your apples? Do you like to eat them fresh? Do you want to bite into them, or do you slice them with cheese? Do you want to cook them? But even in cooking apples, there's diversity. Is it sauce you like, or pie, or cake, or butter, or cider syrup, which is just boiled down juice and wonderful. If you want to juice them, do you like your cider fresh and sweet, or are you going to ferment it into hard cider? These are all things to consider and reasons to have a diverse orchard. The climate is changing. One of the critical things here is that we've got cold, wet springs. This year, we had a gap in the cold and wet that was the perfect timing, and pollination happened and the trees are loaded. But part of the reason that happened is that flies can fly in colder weather than bees. So a lot of our pollination in the spring comes from flower flies. These are all pictures Russell took in the islands of different flower flies that might be pollinating your orchards. So you want to make sure you have habitat for flower flies. Most of them lay their eggs in water, kind of wet soil, mucky water. Some of them lay their eggs on plants that have aphids on them. So having a garden where you allow for not just plant diversity, but biodiversity, including some of the pesky things like aphids, is definitely going to improve your pollination. And your orchard is habitat. Oh, sorry, pollination. Apples are obligate outcrossers. Two of the same variety will not pollinate each other. Two relatives will not pollinate each other because of these things called S alleles, where if they have the same S, the pollen, which is what's shown here, won't germinate, and you will not get fruit. Kings are triploids. Diversity is key in your orchard to pollination. Timing, but also having unrelated apples so they will pollinate. Fortunately, Your neighbor's trees can pollinate your trees too. So it's really not necessarily diversity just in your orchard, but diversity on the island. Your orchard is habitat. Habitat for birds, habitat for bugs. Those are leaf cutter bee cutouts on one of my pears. Habitat for bats, which will feed on those moths that it's habitat for. Cavities for nesting for bats and birds, and habitat for things like lichens. So it's okay. Old orchards are definitely habitat. It's okay for your orchard to be a little messy to increase the habitat value. The little holes in the dead wood are often where the pollinators will nest. Bees will nest in the holes made by beetles. Taking care of old orchards, you need to take your time. It's going to take at least 3 years. You don't want to over prune old trees because they're going to try and replace everything that you've taken off. So make a plan. Just start with the critical stuff. Don't try and reshape the tree. It's already shaped. That decision was made 100 years ago. There are experts. I'm going to be out at the North Shore Preserve with Marguerite, who is going to be talking about old orchard care. So there are experts here on the island you can get help from. I was going to say, you can ask for help. When you have an old orchard, you don't have to figure that all out yourself. There are people who will help you. Be mindful of the habitat value, but keep in mind that if you don't harvest your fruit, it becomes an incubator for some of the pests. You can feed, let's see, I guess that's in this section, you can feed those buggy fruit to livestock and they'll help clean up so that you don't pass those bugs along. I'm gonna go through this quick because I'm running out of time here. So much apples. This is apple tasting. You can share through apple tastings. We'll do one with the museum on the 4th of October. But here's other things you can do with your fruit. You can sell it. You can give it away. These trees, people invested so much to make them productive, and now we should be enjoying that abundance. And there's lots of different ways to do that. So you can plant more trees, but you can also make friends with people who have them already. This can include gleaning, which gleaning is pest control. We were just talking about bugs in apples. Sharing those fruit, getting them picked up, keeping them from hitting the ground is going to reduce the insect load in your orchards. Okay. So where do we go from here? We are mapping orchards still. There's still a ton here in Orcas that I have never visited. And I apologize if you've invited me and I haven't made it out yet. There are so many trees, and hopefully I will get there soon. So we're mapping, and then we're doing genetics. This is all it takes to get your tree sampled. This is a tube of silica. Your spring leaves go in that tube. They use single nucleotide polymorphism, so individual points in the genome that have mutated to identify different varieties. So the sample consists of the teeniest, tiniest leaves, and I get back results that look like this. This is the results of those genetics. We expected 60 varieties. We found 28 of them so far, but 11 of those were not part of that 60. And we've been finding new crosses. So that means now we're expecting over 70 varieties in old orchards and new crosses. You can discover new varieties. You can create new varieties. These are all apples from seeds planted by my friend Chinmayo. And I just set some of hers off for genetic ID so we can find out what they're seedlings of. You can share your varieties at our scion exchanges. Apples don't breed true. They're obligate outcrossers. In order for these varieties to survive, you have to share them. You have to graft them. The reason that there's still Easttown Rose, the tree is still there, but there's also, it is in people's gardens because they came to grafting workshops and they grew it. Here's ways we can get involved. We can map your trees. We can get some genetic samples. You can share your fruit. You can share your cuttings. You can host a tree if you want one of these heritage varieties. We can graft it for you. You can plant apple seeds if you want to try new variety. You can be involved in gleaning and sharing. And you can use local varieties in products you make. I mean, you're all gardeners, so you probably are more inclined to be growing and sharing. Here's some upcoming opportunities. On October 4th, we're doing a cider pressing and heritage apple tasting with the museum. On the 11th, there's a field day with the land bank at the North Shore talking about orchard care with also apple tasting. And then we're hoping to have this project in the Community Foundation's holiday catalog, where you can support more genetic ID. You can help us name new varieties and get their names protected. You can help us get them grafted into a protected orchard. And we would love to get some of these new varieties paintings as beautiful as the ones the old varieties have, so we can publish a pomona to share with you. So you can find these varieties and learn more about them. I have so many people to thank, including, this does not list the people whose orchards I just raided yesterday. So thank you very much to Sydney and the Lums for letting me raid their orchard, and to Indralaya and to Moran State Park, as well as all of these people and everyone who's ever invited me into their orchard. So hopefully that was not too whirlwind and you will remember some of it, and I would love to answer a few questions.
Yeah.
If anybody online has questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And if anyone here has questions, I'll pass you the mic.
You know, there's an apple that's hugely popular up in BC and very unknown here, great keeper and delicious, which is Spartans.
Yes. So
Can you talk a moment about those?
yeah, so Spartans are a more modern variety than what I've been looking at, but they grow incredibly well here. And yes, and we did just identify some in a old-ish orchard over on San Juan. So Spartans are beautiful, deep red, fragrant apples that taste like, well, I think they just kind of like grapes. The flavor is amazing, and they grow incredibly well here. When I was in college, my father would send me boxes of Spartans from his orchard, and I could tell that I'd received that as a care package when they handed me the box, because I could smell it through all the packaging. They're fabulous. And yes, the reason that they weren't planted in these old orchards is that the variety, I think, is from maybe the 20s, but it's not as old. Most of these orchards were planted around 1910. So, but it does grow beautifully here, and oftentimes it's available at silent exchanges because people have it in their orchards. But yeah, absolutely wonderful variety. I used to know its parentage. I don't off the top of my head.
Question here.
Madrona, in the cooking apples, I've just found that different varieties produce very different dried apples.
Yes.
Could you address some of the qualities and maybe some suggestions there? I really love these, like my Kings turned out really crisp dried apples. And then some kind of get leathery and shrink, and I really like those crisp ones.
Right. I mean, it has to do with the density of the apple, and it's not something I've explored as much, so that, like, I've dried golden russets. I know they dry well. But I haven't necessarily explored as many varieties. I'm trying to think. I think it's the density of the flesh. So like, if you were to try to dry, say, an Akani, it probably would just disappear. And I'm trying to think of why the ones that become leathery. That's a good question. What qualities? I did find a list. A friend of mine asked me the same question. I found a list online of recommended drying varieties, and I cannot remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it's a good question. It's not something I've explored as much as I'd like. The one variety that I had in here that I was told was mostly used for drying is the follow water. Follow water. They're very large. They're not great fresh. They're pretty good baked, but mostly after storage. But I contacted somebody from Virginia about them, and she said, yeah, all we ever did with them was dry them. So follow water is a heritage variety that we should dry well.
What is a pomona?
Oh, a pomona is a catalog of fruit. So what I'm hoping to create, and I have bits and pieces of it, is an annually updated catalog of all the varieties that grow in the islands with what makes them wonderful. So that, starting with apples, so that people can help identify fruit, but also have a better idea of what their options are when they choose to grow different varieties.
I have apple trees that I brought to the island, new ones. Can I graft? There's a Gravenstein and then there's a 4 grafts.
Yeah,
Has Gravenstein, and so I could graft that with some of the old ones.
absolutely. Yeah, so most apples are graft compatible. And so you can put almost any variety on an existing tree. So if you have an old tree, and heaven forbid you don't like the fruit, you don't have to get rid of it. It's got all this amazing stored energy in the wood. And you can change the varieties it produces through grafting. It's called top grafting, but the technique is almost identical to the kind of bench grafting that's done at Scion exchanges. And I'm happy to show people how to do that. Happy to bring it to your trees and show you.
Hi, so there's something called, water retention in apples. We have it in one of our old trees. It might be a king or a 20-ouncer.
Were they-
Water core.
Yeah, where they're clear in the middle.
Yeah, and it happened this year. It hasn't happened for a couple of years.
So I know that it kind of makes them harder to store and kind of strange, but it's actually a good sign because what water core is caused by too much sugar being produced too fast. And so what's going on is that the apple is producing sugar faster than it can incorporate it into the cells. And so what that liquid is just sugary sweetness. It means they won't keep, but they are very good for pressing at that point. Some varieties are more prone to it than others. So it tends to happen when there's lots of sun and when that particular apple has sufficient moisture, which this year was a drought year, so I'm not quite sure, but maybe you had an apple that was still getting as much moisture as it could use. Kings are very susceptible to water core. Yeah, it means they won't keep as well, but they're really tasty when they have it.
Sweet.
A couple questions from the Zoom and then I'll get to more of the
Sure.
people. Have you done cluster analysis to map the genetic diversity of your varieties?
I have not. I do not do the analysis. That's done by Dr. Cameron Peace at WSU Pullman. And I'm not sure what all he does with that data. But so no, I understand the process, but I have not looked further at it, no.
The next question is, where can individuals get their apples identified? We have a 3 grafted tree and 2 others we inherited on the property.
So the project, Dr. Cameron Peace's lab, which has a project called My Fruit Tree, which is online at myfruittree.org. And he will send out tubes like this for collecting leaves. The samples are $50 a piece. For heritage trees, for older trees that are inherited, I'm often happy to come and collect those and include them in our samples as well. And so just to get in touch with me at Madrona@Kwiaht.org. And that's, right now I have funding for San Juan. So trees on San Juan get first priority, but Orcas, there's still a lot of really interesting trees we'd love to include. So either directly by contacting the lab or by contacting me.
Okay, thank you. Those were the Zoom questions, so.
Yeah.
Can you graft apple trees onto another kind of fruit tree, like a cherry or a plum or anything like that?
So fruit trees have certain compatibilities, and apples are one that's mostly compatible with other apples. You can graft them onto crabapple, like Malus fusca. There is one kind of interesting exception, which is the apple variety winter banana, which I don't know why I didn't include it. Maybe I didn't have good pictures. It's a nice late heritage variety, is for some reason graft compatible with pear. So if you wanted to graft apple onto pear, you could graft winter banana on, and then graft whatever variety you want onto winter banana. But they're not compatible with cherries, and not compatible with much other than other malus. So prunus, which is the cherry and peach and plum genus, is more compatible. So the people who have trees that have a bunch of different species as opposed to just varieties, those are typically some kind of prunus, like apricot and plum. Like I graft plums onto an apricot tree without any problem. And pears are compatible with hawthorn and with some maybe compatible with rowan, because there is some interesting hybrids there, and with quince. But apples, it's mostly just apple.
Okay.
So just following up, if you wanted to get your own apple trees tested and get that little tube and take the leaf in the spring, where would you get the tube, the name, where would you contact?
I can so if it's an old tree, you can contact me, Madrona@Kwiaht.org, and I've got the tubes, so I can come and collect them. If it's a younger tree, you can contact myfruittree.org. And at this point, as far as I know, he's still sending out the tubes to individuals. That might not be the case forever, because it's a little easier for him to have me collect and send him a whole box at once.
Hello, Madrona, do you have the information about the nurseries that were here in the island around the turn of the century and why did they take in varieties that came from the East Coast and what went into the selection of that and
Just a little bit,
and
yeah.
why on the islands was it just because of easy access to ferries and transportation via, water?
I actually have a partial answer to that question. A couple weeks ago, the Library and Historical Society had a presentation called Big Apples, Big Business at the library about the history of apple growth in Washington and how they made it out to the West Coast and the irrigation in Eastern and Central Washington, and how there were parts in there of how that affected the the local apple growers here. And that presentation is available on the library's YouTube page, which is the same place that this presentation will be available. So I would check that, and that should give you some more context for that.
Yeah, so it has one critical section, because I went to that presentation, that'll help explain some about the varieties, is the Lewin family, who started one of the first nurseries on the West Coast, which was in Oregon. Eventually they had a few of them, and they advertised in the papers here. And they literally brought their apples with them in a specially made wagon across the country. So they brought the apples directly from their nurseries. Trying to remember where they started that trip. So the selection of varieties was a lot about availability. A lot of people came here from New England as well. So some of the varieties people in the islands brought directly because they've heard about them. Apple growing in the islands was very commercial. People were trying to grow for markets that existed already. So they weren't necessarily trying new varieties. I found one variety in my lists that was developed in southern Washington, and otherwise the varieties were all from the East Coast, from Ohio, from Indiana, Virginia, but not much selection of new varieties here. People wanted stuff they already knew worked. Now there were a couple nurseries here on Orcas. I'm not a historian. Boyd Pratt would be a better source of local history information. So that presentation has excellent regional history, and Boyd's got a book, and I don't know if it includes the nurseries, but there was at least 3 nurseries here on Orcas. And what I looked at when I was looking at variety selection was what was available in the catalogs of the regional nurseries, mostly the ones in Oregon. And there was a nursery in Victoria, but it's not clear that people were actually ordering from there. I think the border may have been a problem even then for things like trees.